At sunrise, a lone cowboy rode toward the Apache camp with something no one expected to see: 200 horses that had disappeared weeks earlier. The tribe watched in disbelief as their missing herd returned. But the greatest surprise came when the Apache chief stepped forward, looked directly at the cowboy, and made a gesture that left him completely speechless. What happened next changed the cowboy's life forever. Roach Morgan had been riding alone since before sunrise when he noticed the dust rising beyond the ridge. At first, he thought it was a storm moving across the valley. Then the dust shifted. A low rumble rolled across the open land. Roach pulled his horse to a stop and narrowed his eyes. Horses! Hundreds of them. He counted as best he could from the ridge. There had to be nearly 200. The herd moved slowly through the valley, searching for grass and water. They were tired, but they were still strong. Roach had never seen so many horses traveling together without a rider guiding them. He climbed down from his saddle and watched carefully. Something about the animals bothered him. These were not wild horses. Many carried simple leather markings around their necks. A few had distinctive symbols painted near their shoulders. Roach remembered hearing about a large herd that had disappeared from an Apache community several weeks earlier. He had never paid much attention to the story. Until now. He walked closer. One gray horse approached him cautiously. Roach noticed a small leather tag tied beneath its mane. There was a symbol carved into it. He had seen that symbol before. The realization made him step back. "These are the missing horses," he whispered. Roach looked toward the distant hills. His own ranch was struggling. He needed money. A herd this large could change his situation completely. For several minutes, he stood there thinking. No one would know if he simply continued toward town. No one had seen him find the horses. But Roach had been raised with one simple rule. If something did not belong to you, you did not keep it. He climbed back onto his horse. The next several hours were difficult. Roach slowly guided the herd toward the eastern trail. Whenever a few horses wandered away, he rode around them and carefully brought them back. By afternoon, his clothes were covered in dust. His horse was exhausted. Roach was tired too. But he kept going. As the sun began to drop behind the hills, he saw movement on a distant ridge. Riders. Several of them. They had spotted the herd. The riders stopped suddenly. For a moment, neither side moved. Then one rider turned and disappeared toward the valley. Roach knew exactly what was happening. The Apache community had seen their horses. He raised one hand so the approaching riders could see that he meant no harm. When they finally came closer, Roach spoke calmly. "I believe these belong to you." The riders stared at the enormous herd behind him. Then they looked back at Roach. One of them turned his horse and hurried away again. Roach watched him disappear over the ridge. He had no idea that the man was riding back to tell the chief. And he had even less idea that the chief was about to arrive with a question Roach never expected to hear. The Apache chief arrived just before sunset. His name was Eagle Bear, and he rode at the front of a small group of elders and riders. When he saw the herd, he stopped. For several seconds, he said nothing. 200 horses stood behind Roach, moving quietly through the grass. Eagle Bear recognized many of them immediately. "These are ours," he said. Roach nodded. "I thought they might be." The chief studied him carefully. "Where did you find them?" Roach explained everything. He told him about the valley, the markings, the leather tag, and the long journey back. He did not mention how much money the horses might have been worth. He did not ask for anything. Eagle Bear noticed that. "You could have kept them," the chief said. Roach looked toward the herd. "They weren't mine." The chief remained silent. One of the elders began checking the horses. He recognized several animals by their markings and called the others forward. Slowly, the realization spread through the group. The missing herd had truly come home. Eagle Bear turned back to Roach. "You traveled this far without knowing what would happen when you arrived?" "I only knew where they belonged." The chief's expression softened slightly. "You are tired." "A little." "You will eat with us tonight." Roach hesitated. "I should probably keep moving." Eagle Bear shook his head. "You brought our horses home. Tonight, You are our guest. Roach finally nodded. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the community gathered around a simple evening meal. Roach expected questions. Instead, the chief asked about his ranch. Roach admitted that things had been difficult. Eagle Bear listened quietly. Then he said something that caught Roach completely off guard. These horses were not only animals to us. They carried the memories of our families. Roach looked toward the herd. I understand. The chief studied him for a long moment. Perhaps you understand more than you realize. Roach frowned. What does that mean? Eagle Bear only smiled. You will understand tomorrow. That night, Roach lay beneath the open sky, wondering what the chief could possibly mean. He had come expecting nothing. Yet somehow, he sensed that returning those horses had opened a door to a story connected to his own family. The next morning, Eagle Bear asked Roach to walk with him beyond the main camp. They stopped beside an old wooden post marked with a faded symbol. Roach stared at it. I have seen that before. The chief nodded. Your father knew this mark. Roach's expression changed. My father. Eagle Bear told him that many years earlier, Roach's father had crossed paths with the Apache community during a difficult winter. He had helped them care for their horses and had once returned an animal that had wandered onto his property. He could have kept it, the chief said. Instead, he brought it back. Roach listened quietly. He had spent most of his life believing his father had lived a simple life and rarely traveled beyond his ranch. You knew him. I knew his character. The chief reached into a small leather pouch and pulled out an old wooden token. Roach immediately recognized the carving. His father had owned one just like it. My father never told me about this. Perhaps he believed some stories were better left for another time. Roach touched the token carefully. For years, he had wondered what kind of man his father had really been. Now a piece of that mystery was finally coming back to him. Eagle Bear continued. When you returned our horses, the elders remembered your father. Roach looked toward the valley where the herd was grazing. So this is why you asked me to stay? Yes. The chief placed the wooden token in Roach's hand. Your father earned respect here. Yesterday, you reminded us why. Roach looked down at the token. He had expected a simple thank you for returning the horses. Instead, he had discovered a connection to his father's past. Then a rider approached from the valley. There is a problem, the rider said. Eagle Bear turned. What happened? The grazing land is becoming crowded. We need another place for the herd. The chief looked at Roach. Then Roach realized the story was not finished yet. Roach followed Eagle Bear toward the western valley the next morning. The land was wide and open, with enough grass to support the herd if the community could find a safe way to use it. Roach studied the ground carefully. There is water beyond those hills, he said. Eagle Bear nodded. We know. But the land is close to several ranches. Roach understood the problem. Old misunderstandings had made cooperation difficult. Still, he believed the situation could be solved. I can speak with the ranchers. Eagle Bear looked at him. You would do that? Roach shrugged. I returned your horses because it was right. Helping find a place for them is no different. Over the next few days, Roach visited nearby ranchers. Some were uncertain at first. Others listened. Roach did not demand anything from them. He simply explained what he had seen and why he believed the valley could be shared fairly. Eventually, several ranchers agreed to help. Together, they repaired old fencing and marked safe paths toward the water. The Apache community contributed their knowledge of the land, while the ranchers provided tools and supplies. For the first time, people who had spent years keeping their distance were working toward the same goal. One evening, Roach stood beside Eagle Bear as the horses moved peacefully through the valley. You have done more than return our herd, the chief said. Roach shook his head. We all helped. Eagle Bear smiled. You still do not understand. Understand what? The chief turned toward the gathered community. Then he placed his hand over his heart. You came here as a stranger. He paused. You leave as family. Roach stood completely still. He had expected gratitude. He had expected, perhaps, a simple farewell. He had never expected those words. For the first time, Roach understood that his decision to return the horses had created something far greater than a single act of kindness. It had opened a path between people who once believed they had nothing in common. Months later, the valley had become a peaceful grazing ground. The 200 horses were healthy again, moving freely across the grass. Roach visited often, and his friendship with Eagle Bear grew stronger. One evening, the chief handed Roach the old wooden token that had belonged to his father. "Your father earned respect here," Eagle Bear said. "You have earned it too." Roach closed his fingers around the token. He had returned the horses expecting nothing. Instead, he had discovered a part of his father's past and found people who welcomed him as one of their own. As Roach rode home beneath the setting sun, he looked back at the valley. 200 horses moved quietly across the hills. He smiled. Sometimes, doing the right thing brings no reward you can see. But sometimes, it brings something far more valuable. A place where you finally feel you belong. Sometimes, the greatest reward is not what you receive, but the people you meet when you choose to do what is right. Roach returned 200 horses because he believed they belonged with the people who had cared for them. He never expected anything in return, yet his honesty opened the door to an unexpected friendship and a connection to his father's past. Like this video if you believe one honest decision can change someone's life. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more emotional Western frontier stories filled with courage, kindness, unexpected friendships, and unforgettable moments. Comment below, if you were Roach, would you have returned the horses even if you knew they could change your own life? Share this story with someone who believes that doing the right thing always matters. This is an original fictional story created for entertainment and inspirational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or historical events is purely coincidental.